Hello, everybody. We are back again with the next talk. Now we come with a special guest. He's Robertson. Robertson is the founder of and director of 8 Connect People and Change. His focus is on enable organizations and their people to thrive and succeed in a future that will continue to be unpredictable and challenging. This means being adaptable, agile, and resilient individually and collectively. Rob enables these qualities by applying his experience in change, HR leadership, and sports psychology, with a particular focus on the dynamics of motivation and emotion. When he's not working, Rob enjoys competing as a master swimmer, playing water polo, very tough, my friend, and spending time with his family. He's gonna talk about how can HR become a key player in business transformation. Hello, my friend. How are you, Rob?
Hi, Fran. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Thank you for having me today.
Very happy to have you on board, Rob. And I'm anxious to listen to your talk because, all those that are in HR, I think your talk is especially interesting. Your time. And for our people, enjoy it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, yeah. So can you see? Yeah, so you can see my my slides. That's great. Okay. So yes, as Fran said, I'm going to talk for half an hour or so on how I think HR can become a key player in business transformation. I'll just introduce myself, but thank you for joining me first of all, and I'll introduce my talk. I'm generally described as describe myself as a business psychologist, as I'm a principal practitioner with the Association of Business Psychologists, an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society. Became chartered psychologist in 2005. But it was originally in sports psychology. And then, although psychology has always influenced my work, it's actually often sat in the background, with the business part in the foreground. My business career has actually been quite eclectic, with roughly half the time spent working in consultancy, half in-house. I've spent a lot of my time in change and transformation, starting with the early days as a graduate IT consultant before completing my professional training in sports psychology, after which I moved back into consultancy, into change management, organizational development consultancy, then got into operational leadership. And then actually my last role before starting my own business was as the European HR director with a company called Tata Technologies. You probably will have heard of the Indian Tata Group. Well, Tata Technologies was their global engineering and IT services firm. In fact, the photo in the middle of my slide there is the European HQ that I was responsible for getting built and moving people into. So I'm quite proud of that, and I always quite like to share it. But on the right, as Fran mentioned, I'm never more at home than when I'm in the pool. My talk is mostly from my own perspective today. It's based on my observations, my experiences, conversations, and reflections over the years. I'm not trying to present an objective truth or definitive list of things that HR can do. It's not a comprehensive review of things that HR can work on. But, if what is apparent that, if a quarter of HR directors don't feel that they have an opportunity to make a valuable contribution to their organization, its strategic direction, then we know really that they're at best playing a supporting role in business transformation. Okay, so I'm confident that most of you will at least relate to some of my observations. If the picture I present of HR does at times come across as a bit of a caricature, I guess in part that's because I want to provoke a response. I don't want to pull any punches, but I also recognize that I can't speak for every organization or even a very reasonably representative sample. But I have been involved in a lot of transformation programs, as I mentioned before, for a good number of multinational and blue chip companies. A lot has changed in that time. For example, when I was a graduate working for PwC, before the year 2000, there was no real change management involvement to speak of. Okay. By contrast, I've been in a change team, including change management, communications, learning, etc., that numbered more than 30 people. So a lot has happened, a lot has changed in the course of my career, and both change management and the HR profession have come a long way. At the same time, we know that not all organizations progress at the same pace. So what's the issue that I want to address? My perception is that HR and business transformation, as distinct from HR transformation, are in many organizations like ideal partners who never quite meet. I'm thinking of the old movie Sliding Doors here, in a way. I use the term HR in the broadest sense. Okay, I know that the term encompasses a wide range of roles and skills. I'm not going to try and distinguish HR from OD for the purposes of this talk, because I think in many organizations that's a bit of a theoretical debate, and it's one that I find business stakeholders are rarely interested in. So if you prefer, when I say HR, you might want just think people functions. Sure, in some organizations, some of what I'm going to say is not true at all. In some organizations, HR are making a very, very strong contribution to business transformation, and they're right at the heart of it. But in others, they may be just brought on for their technical expertise. For example, around organizational design, or because it's necessary to carry out consultations over redundancies if there's a restructure. But I'll make a couple of observations. I think one is that the people aspects of change are critical to its success. Okay? By that, I mean engaging effectively, understanding and working with people's reactions to change, developing change agents, helping people learn new skills and behavior. And probably the bit that gets missed most when HR and business transformation aren't connected is the whole thing about integrating new business and new behaviors with things like people management systems, performance management, and so on. The second observation really is that many change programs are still failing to adequately address these challenges. Okay, I think the research shows that it's no longer sort of 70% of change programs that failed to deliver their on their objectives, but the numbers are still fairly significant. And lastly, in my experience, HR are not filling this gap. When it is being filled, it tends to be filled, and too often filled, by contractors and consultants, which comes at a high cost and I think often a questionable benefit, for example, in the form of upskilling. I worked on a major transformation program for a major manufacturer. I learned when I was on that program that the HR function had a central change team. And I never saw them. I never met them. They just were not involved. The consulting firm that was contracted to manage the change was under no obligation to involve them. Part of the problem there was that the program was owned by the CIO and not by the most impacted business units. And that's also why it was pretty much a disaster. Several years later, the same organization tried another transformation, and I happen to know that HR people were on the core team. So things do change. However, in this example, it's unclear whether that was a conscious decision or the result of financial constraints. So I think before I actually address the the core question and start talking about how HR can contribute more to HR to business transformation. I'm also going to just like touch on the question about who should be driving the people activity when it comes to transformation program, and a related question to that is where change management capability should sit in the organization. I'm a believer in having a dedicated change office or function if you have a large enough organization. But I think there are three distinct roles that need to be considered. The first is ownership of the enterprise change plan, ensuring that change is coordinated and given the appropriate priority and attention at exec level. The second is provision and management of change resources. And the third is the development and stewardship of change capability, skills, tools, methods. I think many HR directors would see themselves as owning change management capability. But as my slide shows, change capability, which is the ability of the organization to implement change effectively again and again, is much broader than that. And it incorporates capabilities such as project and program management, business analysis, methods like Lean and Six Sigma, for example. And so there's a challenge there. I think that change management as a capability could fit well into a future fit HR function, but not overall change capability. And so this is a relationship that does need some thought and perhaps a virtual organization to resolve it. But without disappearing down that rabbit hole entirely, there is certainly an opportunity for HR to play a more integral role in business transformation. And although I didn't set out to make this a comment on the post-COVID organization, given the specific challenges that COVID has thrown down about how we get people to work most effectively and bringing issues that I'd say have been pretty mainstream HR topics for a long time, such as flexible working and well-being, into center stage, that opportunity has perhaps never been greater or more important. To take that opportunity, however, I think that members of the HR function or profession in general need to step up and change themselves. So what follows are my thoughts on how HR can put themselves into the position of contributing more to business transformation. You may well disagree with them. You might have some to add. In either case, in a short while, I'd love to hear what you think. The first of the points I'd like to make is suggestions for HR is lead by example on change and agility. I think this is critical. If you want to position yourself as a function, as leaders in change, start by getting your own house in order. And I'd just like to ask a question and give you something to think about, which is, how good is your HR function at managing its own change? What would your stakeholders say? After all, when HR processes and systems change, they affect everyone. In my previous organizations, I've had colleagues that, quite frankly, didn't really get the need to engage, to present the case for change, provide a vision, to have stakeholders actively engage in discussion about what the change means to them and to help them own their preparation for the change. My own view with HR is that part of the problem is that when, for example, there's a new performance management framework, if you don't use it, you might not get a pay rise. If you don't use the LMS, you might not get training. HR have a certain hold over the organization in some respects, in that it can demand compliance. Perhaps that leads to a certain level of complacency when it comes to rolling out these initiatives. I don't know. But compliance and engagement are most certainly not the same thing. Okay? I think part of the problem is that, in my experience, HR business partners are always among the busiest people in the organization. When I was a talent manager, HR business partners always wanted to front the initiatives. But when you're overloaded yourself, let's be honest, you're looking for the path of least resistance, ticking boxes and so on. So not only do HR need to prioritize their initiatives effectively, last week, a friend showed me an annual HR plan with 88 initiatives on it. And make sure that they're properly resourced, but they also need to shed themselves of cumbersome processes and policies that just create work. Which leads me to another question. Does your organization role model agility? That's not a reference to Agile with a capital A, the project management method. But does your HR function set out to simplify its own policies and processes? Does it make them easy to change? I don't mean that anyone should just be able to change a policy to suit themselves, but do you actually have clear and simple processes for changing your policies and processes? Is your decision-making and governance effective? In my last role, I spent more time fighting with India, which was the corporate center, than adding value, because these kinds of things were vague, and I'd argue deliberately so because it increased the CHRO's power. But that's another story. It got to the point where as European HR director, I couldn't make even what seemed quite trivial decisions. Luckily, I'm sure that's not typical. But we lacked agility because we lacked structures that enabled change. That's a paradoxical aspect of agility. On one hand, you're trying to reduce structure that gets in the way of change. But on the other, you have to build structure that enables it. Anyway, start by doing change really well, because HR touches so many people, it will get noticed, just as it gets noticed when you do it badly. So now you're role modeling change and agility. Colleagues from other functions may start to seek you out for help and advice. When they do, find ways of working with them to help them to deliver their objectives and build their capability. I'm sure this sounds obvious to you, but I think that HR are often better known for wanting to police how things are done than they are for contributing practically. More can don't than can do. In the worst cases, I've known them to be perceived as blockers. That's why program directors and other transformation specialists I've known have gone out of their way to keep HR on the outside. Second, when HR are involved, they can have a reputation for wanting to advise rather than rolling up their sleeves and giving practical support. They're too often seen as sitting in their ivory tower, pushing their frameworks and initiatives rather than listening, understanding, and responding. If HR want to play a central role in business transformation, they must be perceived as adding value. By getting out of the ivory tower and joining in, you'll be better placed to build change capability, sharing your experience and coaching colleagues to become more effective at implementing change themselves. And yes, that's extra work. But what it comes down to is a question of what's important to you. Very closely related to my last theme, my next is to invest in key relationships. Again, this could be considered kind of obvious. But how deliberately do you do it? Think about who you interact with, how you interact with them, what value you bring to the relationship, either as an enabler or a connector. How far does your influence really extend throughout the organization? I don't mean that you should play politics. This is about your ability to get things done efficiently. Because you're a positive influence on your network, then it is about having power. And as an example, how many of you have a really productive relationship with your colleagues in finance? Why do I single out finance? Well, HR and finance have to deal with each other quite a lot in my experience. And I was reading an article about transformation at Mars, and Julie Digby was talking about how important her close relationship with finance was. Because together, HR and finance represent the core of the business. And my next thought was, when HR and finance act separately, finance represent the core of the business. I remember at Tata, I had quite a fractious relationship with my counterpart in finance. I saw finances as a blocker to a lot of things. And I think the FD probably saw HR and, in my previous life, sales as irresponsible or something. But to be fair to him, he took the lead. And we really started to try and understand each other and resolve our differences in private. By the time it came to leadership meetings, more often than not, we were on the same page, or at the very least did our best to support each other. It made such a difference. Both departments were often under pressure, both often at the sharp end of difficult issues, and not always perceived as helpful. But when we spoke as one, people listened. So invest in the relationships that matter, but don't play politics. Don't undermine colleagues. Don't toady up to people. Don't have corridor conversations on issues that should be addressed in an open forum. My next point is that you should adopt a pro-change mindset. What does this even mean? I mean, we're all pro-change, right? To illustrate this, I'd like to use an analogy, if I may, using an issue that's been in the spotlight recently, and that's race and Black Lives Matter. One of the things that I've come to appreciate from the whole Black Lives Matter movement is that it's easy not to be racist. It takes a lot more to be anti-racist. One is passive, the other active. Now, I'm not here to preach about that because in the grand scheme of things, I can't particularly claim to be an activist in this respect. But there's a parallel, an analogy that I wanted to make when it comes to pro-change. When we're implementing change, yeah, we want people to be open to change, to accept it for sure. That comes largely from feeling safe enough to try. And even though it's passive, that's all we need from a lot of people. But we also need people who will initiate and proactively stimulate change. What does that mean to me? It means taking a critical perspective and not just accepting things as they are. It means embracing healthy conflict because it takes a certain amount of conflict to create meaningful change. It also means embracing ambiguity and uncertainty because if you need clarity and certainty, all you can really do is follow. And to quote, now, I believe that this has significant implications for the way that people's HR careers develop. What's the most typical route to becoming an HR director? You probably start as a graduate in an HR advisory role or something similar, earning your stripes, doing things like disciplinaries and grievances, learning to follow the right processes. As you move up the scale, you'll do more HR qualifications, learn to follow standards and to be a good HR professional. When you become an HR business partner, you take on a more strategic perspective and take more responsibility. And then again, if you become an HR director. There are exceptions to this path. I should know. I'm one. I spent relatively little of my career inside an HR function and none of it for the particular employer that gave me an HR director role before I got one. But I think there is an issue here, if I'm right, that the main route through HR is one of compliance, process, policy, best practice, like following standards, and much less so one of creativity, challenge, problem solving, thinking on your feet. If you deviate from the path, you'll find it difficult to get through the door. You know, even though I've been an HR director for a period of time, it's not easy for me to get another role because I'm not seen as I haven't taken the CIPD route, and that's not a complaint. But go on to any HR forum online and you'll see masses of posts like, does everyone have a template for? What's the best practice in? People asking to follow, the way things have been done before, rather than forging their own path, rather than solving the problem. Being pro-change means being a bit restless, I think. Perhaps easily dissatisfied with the status quo. Questioning of conventions. Being comfortable with ambiguity and engaging with healthy conflict. And the subject of conflict is one that I'm going to pause on and spend some time on as a theme in itself. I've worked with different clients where conflict avoidance presents an issue. I've seen it in sales, I've seen it in consulting, but I've certainly seen it in professions that provide an internal service. And those professions are increasingly facing an uncomfortable tension with another role that they play as agents of change. There are a couple of ways that I recognize avoiding conflict. The first, like this dog on the slide, is the submissive rollover. If you have a demanding customer, it's easy just to accept everything that they ask for. And this might mean passing the problem on to your colleagues, perhaps with unreasonable expectations. So for this reason, it could also be named the hospital pass. I'm sure you've all been there. This is particularly prevalent in hierarchical organizations and will probably involve dropping the name of a senior stakeholder to make sure that to smooth the way, because that makes it okay. If blindly conforming to the internal customer's requirements is one way of avoiding conflict, another is to blindly follow policy. Close down debate and simply insist on compliance. Those of you from the UK might recognize this as the computer says no approach, or it's not policy. But of course, that doesn't happen in HR. In change, the path of least resistance is often appealing, but it rarely leads to the best outcome because issues are not surfaced early enough to be properly dealt with. But then they have a habit of raising their heads further down the line when it's too late, or at the very least, expensive to resolve them. People will turn up at a training event, for example, just as you're about to go live with a new process and start questioning things because they haven't been given the opportunity to question them earlier. So the training gets wasted. And often it's the participants that are labeled saboteurs, when it's actually an implementation problem. So you have to challenge and encourage people to challenge you. When you're conflict avoiding, it may be because you don't want people to feel bad. It might be because you don't want people to think badly of you. But what you need to focus on is what's going to lead to the best outcome for the organization, on what's going to add the most value. And when you focus on what's going to add the most value, then healthy conflict, becomes easier to handle. My last theme is that you must have a point of view on business issues. I've avoided the temptation to make this specifically about having a strategic perspective, because strategic is a word that's thrown around a lot in HR circles. And actually, it's not always necessary. I think more often it's important to understand how things work, how things fit together from more of an operational perspective. In other words, it's not just understanding the business problem, but understanding it from a systems perspective. Don't just understand the numbers. Understand how the numbers fit together. How do they flow? How does one issue impact another? what might a wider business trend mean for the business and for your stakeholders, not just the people implications. If we look back on the figure that I presented at the beginning of 25% of HRDs who are not making a meaningful contribution to their organization and its strategic direction, my challenge to them would be not just to understand how the business works, but to have a clear point of view on it. Not just an opinion, but a reasoned, thought-through point of view. Have something to say about the worlds of sales, marketing, production, finance, because it's simply not enough to only have something to say when it comes to people. And certainly, the heads of sales, marketing, production, finance will have something to say about people management. I'm not alone in having the view, and I know that I'm not alone in that sense of having the view that genuinely commercial HR professionals remain relatively rare. I can understand that a lot of people get into HR because they're interested in people. I am. But it's important, I think, to be able to understand how people initiatives can actually impact business performance. And it's at least as important to do that as it is to understand how business decisions impact upon people. I think too many HR people are focused on doing HR than they are about enabling business performance. When it comes to building the people plan, how often are HR initiatives really scrutinized in terms of their impact, in terms of business performance, their evidence base, or whether they're just following the latest trend or doing HR for HR's sake? And of course, not only do you need to have a point of view, but you have to be prepared to share it and to risk disagreement. In any case, if you can combine commerciality with a people-first approach and the systemic mindset of an OD practitioner, then I think that as an HR professional, then you can really have a unique impact on your organization. So I chose this slide because it's getting close to dinner time, at least for the Europeans, and perhaps for anyone from North America, it's getting to be around lunchtime. At the end of the day, it's impact that matters. If you're sitting there feeling that you could be adding more value, then you can only, of course, take responsibility for your own contribution. So start where you can, and that's on your own initiatives. Then seek opportunities to build capability through collaboration, which is one way of investing in those key relationships, of course. Adopt a pro-change mindset, seeking not to avoid healthy conflict, but even to mine for it, and having a point of view on business matters, not just on people matters. There's no silver bullet here. I'm sure that you could add more points to this list. No single exec, even the CEO, can wave their magic wand and make you a key player in business transformation unless their entire leadership team buys into it. And that will only happen if you're perceived as someone or as a function that can add value to the process. So it's not the role you hold, but what you do that matters. Thank you. We should have some time for questions and comments. And I can see that some are actually starting to come through. So, if anybody does want to follow up with me, my contact details are there.
That's right. That had been great, Rob. Many ideas came up. Listen to you. Those 6 points are critical. If we want to get an HR transformation, even if we want to transformate the organizations. When you were talking about investing in key relationships, you said, don't play politics. Wow. Wow. You need to be authentic.
Yeah.
You need to be transparent. You need to be,
And there's a fine line between being strategic and deliberate about the relationships you invest in, and being political in the way that you maneuver. But I think there is a difference. I noticed there's a question about which relationships do we know are the key ones. That really depends on what you're trying to do, what's on the agenda. But at the very least, as a business partner, you'll know who some of your key relationships are with. And on the business side, that's apparent. But when it comes to what's important to them, who else do they need to get things done? Do they have challenges? Do they have? We'll keep picking on finance because they're an easy story. Do they have challenges with finance too? Could you help smooth that relationship, for example? It really depends. It really does depend on what you're trying to do. And obviously, then if you're in a more senior position, you'll have counterparts or team members of your own business leadership team that you have to build those relationships with. So sometimes it's quite apparent who they are. It really does depend on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. The second idea that I wanted to point out about your talk is, HR people should have a point of view on business issues, right? It's very important for HR people to share their vision. This was mentioned by Steve Brown in his last book, HR Rising. HR people, we need to speak up. We need to share our value, our ideas, our vision. That is truly important. And about the avoiding conflict, it's absolutely, you're spot on, because I can remember an article by Kyla Moncayo about how to face conflict in my organization. That is truly important, because if we want to foster diversity and inclusion, all these kind of things, we need to tolerate different opinions from different people.
Absolutely, it's so tied in with things like inclusion. It's we need to be we need to be tolerant. We need to be open to being challenged, so we need to lead the way in that. And I noticed the question there about what your advice would be in developing this challenger mindset. I think that in many respects, the way is, as I said, in my talk, is not focusing on two things: not focusing on the fact that there's conflict, but focusing on what you hope to achieve, as a result of challenging or engaging in some healthy conflict, and really focusing on the collective good. And say, I think we're often uncomfortable with because we think that we might be thought badly of, or it might be, actually, it could be either that we feel be thought badly of as not a nice person, or we want to be a nice person and we don't want to offend anybody else. But actually, what you need to do is focus elsewhere. Focus on what's what are you actually trying to achieve, and what's actually the valuable outcome that you're looking for. So it really is about focus.
One thing that helps me a lot is to be focused on the process, on the ideas, on the issue, instead of focus on my ego. Because I want to be right. Sometimes there is not right or wrong answers or decisions or whatever. No. More questions?
I just wanted to add, because the question there about the skills of curiosity, creativity, very much the same mindset. I work, as you mentioned in the introduction, I work with motivation and emotion, and there are two opposing motivations One is the conforming style, so we want to fit in, and one is the rebellious, where we want to oppose, and we have to take on the rebellious mindset more often, and curiosity, creativity, not so much curiosity because that's more about being in the moment, but certainly creativity, critical thinking, all sit in that rebellious state of mind, and curiosity and things like experimentation do, but curiosity also is about staying in the moment and not thinking too much about consequences.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. The last statement that came up was, okay, if we want to change our organizations or my organizations, I have to be the change first. I have to be the change first. I have to lead by example, because it probably is the only way that we can use to get the changes done. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think in large organizations, people are remarkably pragmatic, and looking for a solution. Be the solution. Like you say, be the change. I think if you start, why I started at number one with just do a really good job of change management in your own initiatives, in your own HR initiatives, because people see that. That's a great thing about HR, is that the impact of HR initiatives is felt throughout the organization, and it's either good or it's bad. But if it's good, if people have a good experience of how HR implement change, then actually they'll say, well, we've got this change coming up. Why don't we talk to our colleagues in HR? Because they know what they're doing, and then you have opportunity. It's sort of simple. It's more simple than it is easy.
I think so. I think so.
But I think start with yourselves, and start with your own initiatives.
Yeah. Now, what I found when I've worked in large multinationals is, sometimes you fall in the conformity because you find resistance in the top management, or in the structure when you find hierarchies or these kind of things. But the main message for all those HR professionals that are listening to us today is never give up. Never give up. You can change. You can do small details. You can small changes. Step by step. Probably know more than me, changing habits and changing all of these. But I think it's critical. No.
Take small steps, and it can take quite a bit in a large organization. It can be quite a brave step to stick your head above the parapet. Because there's a good chance that you'll get shot at. But it's just something that if you expect and if you're prepared for, then it has less impact. So don't be put off. Don't need the approval of, if you believe that you're doing the right thing. Keep trying to do the right thing. It's not approval that you need, but to know that you're actually doing what's best all around.
Wow, I think this conversation could be, could continue a long time, because it's a very critical topic just right now, talking about HR, because we are facing tough times, uncertain times, and thankfully HR pros are stepping up and say things, sharing their views. Thank you very much, Rob.
I mean, I just wanted to say, and maybe as I mentioned it, maybe it's the best time for it. It's an opportunity. It's a chance to step up, and and show value.
Thank you again, Rob. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I hope everybody watching has enjoyed it.
Okay, Rob, see you soon and talk soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Bye-bye.